Усім доброго дня. І ми розпочинаємо двохденні воркшопи в межах школи мультимедійного інтерв'ю. Маємо учасників і студентів школи журналістики двох магістерських програм і учасників з інших університетів і міст. Я хочу просто сказати, що і Крилевський прийшов вже, то вже точно можна починати. Я просто хочу сказати, що ми вперше проводимо такого типу школу. Тому за великим рахунком ви усі є своєрідними піонерами, тому що з того вийде і як воно вийде, буде залежати в першу чергу від вас. Я лише хочу сказати, що упродовж цих 2 днів ми спробуємо вам додати розуміння щодо 3 аспектів мультимедійного інтерв'ю. Оскільки ми вважаємо, що мультимедійне інтерв'ю – це поєднання в першу чергу тексту, фото, відео і, можливо, в когось буде аудіо, і відповідно за такою логікою ми будемо працювати. Ми розпочнемо з Денніса Чемберліна, гостьового професора школи журналістики у курсу Університету Айови, Сполучених Штатів Америки, який, власне, буде пробувати вам розповідати про те, як олюднити героя через фотографію, і аби ви не сиділи в цих зручних кріслах і не пуняли, чи не втикали мельник в смартфони свої, то воркшоп Денніса буде тривати упродовж 2 днів. Спочатку буде теоретична частина, потім вас Денніс кудись пошле, що зробити. Я ще не знаю, куди це буде точно. А завтра ви спробуєте те, що ви наробите, назнімаєте, проаналізувати з ним і подивитися, що у вас з того всього вийшло. З обіду, з 2-ї години буде Аня Гін, яка буде вчити вас техніки, власне, проведення інтерв'ю. І вже приїхав Михайло Кріглі з фокусу, який завтра буде розповідати про логіку, концепцію, філософію побудови мрії. Тобто 3 аспекти мультимедійного інтерв'ю в нашому розумінні ми спробуємо за тих 2 дні вам додати, аби ви просто з того, що ви не розумієте, не знаєте, спробували для себе більше чогось взяти. Тому це така загальна логіка. Я вас дуже прошу з 5-ї години після майстер-класу Ані Гін, чи упродовж цього часу, як буде можливість, учасники школи мають можливість поговорити з менторами по своїх питаннях щодо своїх героїв. Ну, а ми тоді розпочинаємо з Денніса Чемберліна. Денніс, ми просимо вас до слова. І перша частина буде англійською мовою. Хто зле розуміє, там є навушники, тому що буде йти синхронний переклад. Прошу не встигатися і брати навушники. Деніс вже взяв, хоча він говорить англійською. Окей, добре, Деніс, вам слово, дякую.
If you think you're going to have trouble, I guess there's a whole rack of these in the back for translation. But what I want to talk about today is how to use photography, how to use visuals well in a multimedia project. The internet is a visual medium. And even if we're working for print publications today, we still need to be thinking about the visuals. It's how the 21st century, how people in the 21st century communicate. And what I want to do is talk about things that visuals do well and what they don't do well. I mean, I've been shooting over 30 years, and I think I'm not sure that I see differently than I did 30 years ago. I do a bit, but the main thing is now I realize what photography doesn't do well and what it does do well, and so I know where to put my energy. I mean, it used to be when I started out, I pointed my camera at everything, and now I realize that there are some things it makes more sense to concentrate on, and other things that it's better for text. And now I love using audio. And throughout my career, I've had times when I put the camera aside and I did more writing than I did photography because text seemed to be the best tool at that time for what I wanted to communicate. So what I want to do is talk about how to find things that are going to work best with photos so that you can put your energy into that and then decide when you need text and when you need audio, when you need video. If we think about photography as a form of communication, which is essentially what it is. It's not I have students sometimes who sign up for my classes because they're creative and they like expressing themselves and their creativity, and I tell them, go to the School of Art. I have an art degree. I also have a journalism degree, and I also have an English literature degree. And I really enjoyed my time in graduate school when I was studying art, but I still think it's about communicating. It's not about expressing myself. It's not about expressing my creativity. If that comes out, that's fine. But when we're journalists, it's about telling a story. It's about communicating an issue. It's about telling other people's stories, not our own stories. And in order to communicate, we need to think of what are the ways of persuasion? How do we communicate with an audience? Do these look familiar to you in any of your previous studies of classics? Think of ethos is the credibility of the source. It's your credibility. That's why in journalism we think about ethics. Today on the internet, everybody's a journalist. At least they think they are. They're all a photographer because they have a phone in their pocket that takes photos, so they're a photographer. And I had discussions with people that think that anybody who starts a blog is a journalist. And I don't agree, because I think a journalist has to think about the audience, and they have to think about their responsibility to the audience. And that's how you will gain your credibility with an audience, if they know they can trust you. When I go online, there's, I don't know how many billion websites are out there to get information. And I go to the ones that I know that I can trust. Ones that have track records. If there's a particular journalist that I've had experience with in the past and I know that they've lied or they've really misled people, I don't go there anymore. And I think a lot of readers eventually follow the same process. Although I think now people go to somebody who tell them what they want to hear, which is one of the, I think one of the disadvantages of the internet is there's so many sources of information that you can always find some place that will reinforce your preconceptions and your prejudices, which is what we're seeing in American politics. I think we're seeing it around the world now. Logos, this is how we address something logically, how we make the case. This is how you convince people. Pathos, the emotional appeal. Now, the thing is, these are three different areas of how to persuade an audience and how to communicate an idea. Credibility is up to you. When you're going to practice as a journalist, you need to be thinking about your credibility. Logos, what's a good way to explain a situation? Think of how would you talk about an environmental problem? Would you use words, video, audio, text? You could do all of those. But if you need to explain background, text, or let's say an interview and somebody explaining that, but words will explain background better than a photograph can. Photographs tend to go with the pathos. They appeal to our emotions. They pull at our heart. They cause people sometimes to cry. That's why you can watch a powerful video clip and it's very emotional, and it's easier to use the pathos in the photographs, but logos, that usually works best with text. So I'm going to give you some examples. Okay, words can explain what happened behind this, but the visuals are going to show you more about how people react. Now, you could write, that they were upset. A few of you may have been in a class where you've seen this before, so don't. But do you know what's going on here? without words, do you understand what's happening? Did anybody think they understand? Or people who do know, did you understand before I explained what happened? Anybody? Just shake your head no if you don't understand what's going on. Why is that? Is it because there's a mixture of emotions? Is it, I mean, is this a happy photo or is it a sad photo? There's smile, this woman is smiling up here, but the boy, is he upset or is he happy?
I think he's confused.
He's confused.
Yeah.
That's probably really quite accurate. He's confused at his emotions at the moment. And a photograph, you know, this might take a paragraph of words to explain how they're feeling, but a photograph can do it instantly. The boy is confused, he's upset. There was a really strong rain that lasted about 30 minutes. The streets were flooded. Sometimes when there's a lot of water going under the sewers, the lids pop up off the street and you have a big hole there. And it kind of acts like a drain. And as the water goes down, it circles down. This boy and his best friend were playing in the street, and his friend was sucked down that hole and went down under the street, and they thought he was dead. And so this was made the moment that the firemen notified them that they had found the boy alive. He was unconscious, but they found him like 1.5 kilometers away at the end of where the big pipe came out into a lake, and he was lying on the edge of the lake. So that's why the mother's happy, because her son, she just found out he's alive. The boy he hadn't been crying, but the moment he found out his best friend was alive, he started crying. The little boy's mother is in the back, and that woman, the girl on the left, is the older sister of the boy who they just found alive. So something like this works better usually visually. You need the words though to explain it. I mean, the photos can't explain what happened. They can explain how people react, or show how people react. That's what photos and visuals do best. This one here, we know this woman has some strong emotion, but we don't really know exactly why. We need the words to explain exactly what's happening, what's the background. Do you have any clue? Do you have an idea what's going on?
Is it funerals?
It's a funeral, yeah. Americans probably would see, because American funerals, oftentimes, if the person was in the military, there will be an American flag folded in a triangle. So for our American audience, they see this, and they immediately think military funeral, because it's a symbol that they're familiar with. It was a military funeral. It was a group of, like 350 soldiers who had survived a terrorist attack in Lebanon, and they were 2 months later flying home at the end of their tour of duty for the holidays, for Christmas, and the plane crashed and everybody died. It was a freak weather thing. They survived war, they survived a terrorism attack against the building they were in, and then they died in the plane crash on the way home. So, and that's the grandmother of one of the soldiers at the funeral. What do you think might be going on here? We see there's strong emotion.
Maybe dad going on the war or something?
Exactly.
Yeah?
Yeah. Their father was leaving. We had a lot of this over the last decade in our state. I mean, every state in America, where we had what I call like part-time soldiers who, for years and years, they go and have training 1 week in a month, but we hadn't had a war for such a long time that it was just kind of a formality. They'd every 3 days a month, they'd go and have training, and then the rest of the time they're living with their family and they're not soldiers. Well, because of some political situations in the States and having a war that's lasted over 10 years, things like this happen every month. Because these guys and women who thought they were going to be part-time soldiers were actually sent abroad, and this is one of the families in the community who, you know, I've seen kids reacting like this often in photos. My students have gone out and shot it. They usually feel very uncomfortable because they feel like it's intrusive, but the truth is they ask the media to come because they want attention so that people know that somebody's paying the price, somebody is going to war. Sometimes it's not tragic. Sometimes it applies, you know, photographs can talk about the relationship between this grandfather and his grandson. Sometimes simple moments. Two brothers, you know, it's kind of like a, you know, family snapshot kind of thing you see on, I don't know, Instagram or something. But you can see that they're close. Okay. What I think a good way to use photography in your projects and in your reporting is to figure out how it's best going to communicate the story. This is a few images from a story that was going to be a routine, factual text piece. The story was about a service. It was the first one in America that started flying helicopters to rescue people when they were injured. And this group of people at this one particular hospital were the first ones in the US to do it. They were former Vietnam pilots. They'd been helicopter pilots in the Vietnam War, and the nurses had been nurses in the Vietnam War. So this was, you know, these 70s, 60s and 70s, these people had a lot of really thorough training. And they started a service where they could rescue people that were far from hospitals, in terrible accidents, sometimes up in the mountains when the weather was bad. And the service had trained everybody else in the United States. All the other hospitals that started this kind of service then were trained by this group of people in Colorado. We were asked to, or I was told that we were going to cover it and do a story about it. And what we were going to do is write and then make a picture at a ceremony celebrating the 25 years of this. And there was going to be a cake and there were going to be speeches. And I said, okay, that sounds fine, but what's a photograph of somebody standing at a podium like this and talking to people in an auditorium? How does that tell us about what these people do? How does it tell us how dedicated they are? You know, yeah, sure, we can write and say that these people are dedicated. They've trained hundreds of other pilots and nurses around the country. They even train people in Switzerland. But how does that really tell us how their job is? So I spent some more time doing research and got permission from the hospital to spend time with them. And I spent probably about 4 months. And every nurse was paired with one pilot. So every pilot and nurse worked together the same shift every single time. They worked 3 days a week, 12 hours each time. And so they got to really know each other. And it was like a team where they could even anticipate what the other one needed. So what I did is I followed 4 different teams. Because I didn't know, when you're doing a story like this, you don't know, people have to feel comfortable around the camera. And so I would go and spend 8, 10, hours at a time at the hospital. Then I go do my other job. And after about 2 weeks, I realized there was one team that were comfortable with my camera, comfortable with my presence, and the other ones, after 2 weeks, still felt uncomfortable, and every time I would pick up the camera, they'd look at me or they'd look away. So, cut my losses, stop going to meet those people. That's what you have to do. You have to realize if you're working on a story that's more than one afternoon, you have to realize some people just are not comfortable with your presence with the camera. And if that's the case, you know, I gave it 2 weeks, and if I couldn't get them to be comfortable in 2 weeks, but one team was totally oblivious to me, and they interacted like I wasn't there. And then every once in a while we chat and so forth, but then the minute they start having work to do, or I'd start picking up my camera, they would just ignore me. So that's where, from then on, for the next few months, it made it easier for me because then I only had to go with one team. And I followed them for 3 months, about 3.5 months. Most of the time it was incredibly boring. Their first days, I would shoot maybe 100 photographs in the course of a day, and then later on I'd shoot maybe 5. Because I made this shot already 10 times, and I knew I had it. Or I already had the shot of them relaxing. So I would sit there and watch to see if I saw something new, but if I didn't see something new, I just sat there and watched. Sometimes I talked, but mostly I watched. And then sometimes things would happen and emotions would be more intense, and at that point I just fell into the background. As far as they were concerned, I didn't exist anymore. And then I could work and do what I needed to do and just observe and shoot and follow them. And then close it. This is after one of her patients had just died. And the thing is, these people saw patients die all the time. But in this case, it really hit her. I mean, they have like a wall that they put up because, you know, if you've been a doctor or a nurse in the war, you've probably seen a lot of things. And these nurses actually did surgery. They were qualified to do surgery out at the scene of accidents. And they also had the power to declare somebody dead, which normally only certain doctors have that power. But in this case, this was a routine transfer of a guy who a few days earlier had a heart attack. It was serious. They brought him in, they saved him, everything was fine. He was looking really good now. And he was going to be flown back to his town, which was about an hour or about 45 minutes by helicopter, so that he could be closer to his family. And while he was in the helicopter, he had another heart attack, and they couldn't rescue him this time. And she'd been talking to him like 30 seconds before. And I was in the helicopter too. I had to, and actually in order to do this, I had to take the place of one of the medical personnel. So I had to, before I could even start shooting, I had to have some training and get certified for certain techniques, and I had to actually help out and do things like chest compressions, and there's like a bag if somebody can't breathe, and instead of having a pump, you have a black rubber bag, and I had to be able to do all those kinds of things, and I did a couple of times. So the camera would just be hanging on my shoulder out of the way. And most of the time, they had everything under control. I didn't have to do much. The only time, actually, there was one time when I was really shaking because it was such a gruesome scene, and I was gonna just say, okay, leave me here, don't take me back to that hospital. I will find my way home eventually. have a fireman go, because I can't do this, because this is just, the guy was really in bad shape and he had a big hole in his chest and his back. I didn't have the wherewithal that these doctors and nurses had. Okay, this is a project that one of my students worked on, and it had to do with how we relate to guns in America. Americans have a specific relationship to firearms. About 3 weeks before I sat down with her to talk about this project, 26 people have been killed in a school. 20 children and 6 teachers by a guy who walked in with a bunch of weapons. Some of them, basically they were weapons that you use in war. They weren't weapons you use for hunting. They were automatic weapons that you would have in any war zone. And he just opened up and started killing people. And what happened was, there was this polarization, like every time we have a mass shooting in the United States, which happens on essentially a daily basis, some people say, oh, but guns don't kill people, people kill people. And then other people say, if we had no guns, then we would have a safe world. And neither side will talk to each other. And so this student was an international student. She was from China. And she thought it was really weird how Americans thought about guns. She met students when she was doing this who carried guns with them to class, even though it wasn't allowed on our campus. But it's a law allowed, they said, well, the Second Amendment of the Constitution allows me to carry guns. She realized that she had a lot of friends who had guns in their apartments, and she didn't realize that. So what she started doing was asking people, like friends of friends, not people she would meet on the street. She wouldn't walk up to some stranger on the street and say, you have a gun, you carry a gun. But she would start talking to people and that she already knew or were friends of hers, or friends of hers. And sometimes it was through the internet, but it was always somebody who was somehow an acquaintance. But that led from one group to another, and then she met more and more people. And so she started out finding a student group of people who shot for sport. They shot for sport, they shot for hunting. And what she wanted to do was talk to them and see how they felt about guns. She had a perspective. Her perspective was it was wrong and we shouldn't have guns. And I said, wait, you're not here to advocate, you're here to listen and see why, and try to understand why Americans feel the way they feel. And you can't travel around the whole country, so let's just do our community. Let's just go maybe 30 kilometers in every direction, but how do people in the center of Iowa, in the center of the United States feel about weapons? How do they feel about guns? Why do they have them? Why are they against them? So she found out that people love to talk to her. They wanted to talk to her. They wanted to invite her out. They wanted to buy her guns. They wanted to have her shoot their guns. And she thought it was really, really odd. But the fact that she was willing to listen to them, more and more people started coming to her. They said, oh, I heard that you're doing a story about this. And so they were willing to talk to her. At first she was terrified nobody would talk to her because she thought it was something they were ashamed of. And it turned out they weren't. So she went out hunting with people. She went to where they were practicing. And basically, she listened. She listened and she observed. These are all students at our university, and they like to shoot for sport. you know, and it doesn't matter the weather. It's cold, they'll continue to practice. They have teams. But she came back and she said, oh, my ears hurt. So you're supposed to put little, you know, rubber things in your ears to protect your ears. Then she went in closer and she started visiting people in their flats, visiting people at their homes, who instead of having guns for sport, had guns because they were afraid. And the funny thing is, where we live, it's not, Chicago has a lot of crime. New York has crime. Where we live, crime is like somebody steals your bicycle or they break the window in your car. If somebody breaks into a house and steals televisions, that's big, big news. Because, wow, we have a crime wave. So these people are living in a town that is pretty safe. Actually, a lot of people in our town only lock their house when they go away on vacation. And when I moved there, I was, you don't lock your house? No, what if one of my neighbors needed to come in and borrow something? Because that's not the world I grew up in. But this is small town Iowa, and that's how people think. They say they leave the keys in the car because that way they don't lose the keys. And then you have some students who move to town and they're afraid of crime, and so they carry guns, which can lead to accidents. And about once every 2 years, there's some young person who accidentally shoots himself in the leg because he had a gun in his waist or in his back of his pocket or something like that. But they figure it makes them safe. She went out with hunters. She found a lot of hunters. In rural areas, that's where a lot of people do hunting. Deer, larger animals. And then eventually she found a story that worked and really had more emotional impact, and it audiences at this point, she couldn't publish this one at first. She found a family that had almost 400 guns. The father liked guns, and his 5-year-old son had a few guns, and his five-year-old son shot and hunted. So she spent time, this one here she had to go a little bit farther, she had to drive farther because it was way outside of town. Actually not really close to our town. But when she got there, she was really nervous. I remember her calling me. She was close to their house, and she says, "What? They may kick me out. They're not gonna like me. They're gonna think I'm out to say negative things about them or something like that." I said, "You just go there, talk to them, listen to them, and see what happens. Don't judge them. Don't." And she says, "Well, but 5-year-old boys shouldn't have guns." I said, "No. The minute you go in with that attitude, they'll sense that you have to go in with an open mind and just listen to them because it's their story, not your story." So she went there, and it turns out they loved her. And they kept inviting her back, and they invited her to stay at their house, and they gave her meals, and she became part of their family. And I knew this family through somebody else who then who gave me their name and suggested that this student could contact them. So then I heard stories from the other people that, oh, they just think she's sweet, oh, they'd like to adopt her, you know, she's part of them. They wanted to buy her a gun, she said, no, I can't have a gun, I'm Chinese. They were gonna buy her a pink gun. But she said that this boy played with play guns all the time, but he also knew the difference about a real gun and a play gun. And I'm gonna try to pull up. Let's go back to this. I'll come back to that one later. The funny thing was, she had a hard time publishing that. And nobody would publish it. She had great interviews to go along with it. And then, about 9 months later, she was working at the Washington Post on an internship for 3 months. And 9-year-old boy, I can't remember which state, was learning how to shoot. But he was learning how to shoot an automatic, like a war weapon, and he accidentally killed his instructor. Because when you grab the gun, he goes like that, he hit the trigger and it just sprayed lots of bullets. And so all of a sudden it was in the news that children, like a 9-year-old boy killed an instructor to teach him how to shoot. And at that moment, the Washington Post immediately wanted to publish her story about this 5-year-old boy. And they published it, and the reaction on the internet was amazing. Hate, both sides. I mean, I felt the family who were involved, I think that they just kind of closed off. They actually handled it well, because they were called really, really terrible things. And then people who were hunters or people who grew up in the West. So it started this whole, there were hundreds of reactions back and forth, and it started this class war, essentially, between educated people in the cities and, quote, uneducated people in the countryside, which is not the truth, because there's plenty of uneducated people in the cities, and there were a lot of very educated people in these small towns. And it just showed how polarized the country is on this issue. I'm not sure, honestly, I don't think I'd want my 5-year-olds playing with guns, but that's just my take on things. This family, they own a lot more guns than I would ever want to own. I don't even own one. But just the hate and the reaction to this story. And she felt really bad after it was published. She felt bad for the family. She apologized to them. And I really admire how they said, don't worry about it. We know the world is full of people like this, and we're not going to let that make us feel bad. We're not going to let it, affect us. Okay, this is another. Oops. Will this play the audio through the entire system? I hope. Let's see. No.
Це HDMI, воно буде йти зверху все.
Can you make it louder on here?
А може на колонку принесемо просто?
Звук через HDMI все одно йде на проект.
Okay, this was about a news event. And a lot of times, when people cover a news event, they just cover the action that takes place. You know, a protest. This was a protest that lasted months. There was this movement in the States called Occupy, and it had to do with pretty much every, you know, common citizens wanting to get back and have some control over their political systems and their communities. And these two students went out, and instead of just covering the protest, because if we went to our local newspaper or the local television station, every day they would have a few pictures of people holding signs and yelling. And it's like, how many days can you do that and you don't understand what those people are upset about? It's not the fact that they're holding signs and yelling. It's like, what are they yelling about? Why are they upset? Why are they living in tents? That's what the responsibility of the journalist is. Just, why are these people feeling this way? And so these two students went out and they spent a couple of days, afternoons with them, listening to their stories, listening to them talk about why they felt strongly about these issues. I'm going to play it. You may not be able to hear a whole lot. There's no way to make this louder that we know of. Okay. I thought maybe the remote control would work. They identified individuals. This guy, he cares about having a better future for his daughter. You know, some of the people who are there to support, like this guy, he was supporting people who aren't as fortunate as him. He's got a good job, he's got a good life. But he said there are a lot of people in our society who don't, and I'm here to support them. And there was that one woman who had the sign that said, "I can't afford to fly to China for a job." And the student said, "I feel bad because I'm from China." She said, "You don't want that job. That job only pays $1 a day." But instead of just photographing the protests, their job, or their goal in this was to actually put human face to what these protesters are. And it actually doesn't even make it look like a bad protest. I mean, I think because it was a beautiful day, the leaves were yellow and red, and there's almost like this romantic look to it. It's kind of strange because people were there because they were upset, but because of the way the weather turned out and the colors, it looks kind of like a nice gathering of people. But it stayed like that for days and days and days until the police came and ran everybody out. And the police just started ripping up things and they weren't there, unfortunately, for that day. Because that happened in the middle of the night when the media wasn't there. That's what the police always did. Okay, I'm trying to see if there's a way, because this one here is a story that a student did, I assigned them to do a community issue. They had to identify some kind of problem in our community, and they had to find a way to humanize it. Because issue stories are for text. Like I mentioned earlier, text explains better. Photographs don't explain very well. So they needed to find an issue, write a little bit of text, because we did this online, to explain the background, the facts, the problem, but then the main part of their assignment was to humanize it. And this young guy wanted to do a story about food insecurity. Food insecurity is defined as people who do not have enough resources to know if they are going to have a proper meal that day. And in our town, which, as I told you, is a really safe, wonderful city, you can leave your keys in your car, you don't need to lock your door unless you're going away for 2 weeks. 12% of the people in our community, according to a study, do not know if they're going to have enough food to eat that day. 12%. In this small town in the American Midwest, in the middle of farmland. I mean, it's a sea of farmland all around us. And 12% of the people don't know if they have enough food to eat. So this student decided he wanted to find those people, which was not easy because people like that don't want to talk. They don't want to say, oh, I don't know if I have enough money to buy food for my kids today. So he went to, and I had a couple different students who were trying to do the same story. So I suggested that they go to some churches that in the basement every day serve free food to people who don't have enough to eat. We call it a soup kitchen. People who are at the church volunteer time, they donate food, some grocery stores donate food, they cook it, and they'll do like 1 meal a day. So maybe one church will do a meal at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and another church will do a meal at, say, 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. So I had students go to a couple different of these churches, and most of the time, they came back the next day and they said, they kicked me out. They kicked me out. They wouldn't let me do the story. And I asked them how they approached it. It's like, well, I just came in there and I told them I was a student journalist and I wanted to write about them, and I asked if anybody wanted to talk to me. And they said no. And I said, no, number one, you made it a yes-no question. You need to just go there and see if they need help in the kitchen. Do they need help washing dishes? Can you start talking to people who work there? And then maybe you can start getting to know the people who come there for the food. And this one student actually, they told him, oh no, we don't need help cleaning dishes or anything like that. But he'd actually gone to this other kitchen on his own, and they took a liking to him, and he was able to converse with the people who worked there, and then he started having conversations with the people who were in line getting food, and then he sat down at a table and started talking to people. And by the end of the first day, people had invited him back to their homes. And I think it's because he was carrying the camera. This kid was a photographer. The only thing he thought about in life, or thinks, well, now he has a child, so now he thinks a lot about his child and his wife. But at that time, all he did was shoot photos all the time. He was obsessed. But he just let the camera hang on his shoulder that first night, and he talked to people. And he got to listen to their stories, and he found out what was going on with them. And then, when they invited him to their houses, they knew he was going to shoot photographs. And he also shop, and he continued to go to the kitchens. And the thing was, the more that he showed up at these places, the more people recognized him. Oh, I saw you last week. Oh, I saw you Wednesday. Then they started talking to him, and then he had a lot of people who would talk to him. But, you know, on the first day, not necessarily. This is going to be, what the people say here is really important. If I shut up, can you guys hear enough to kind of make out what's the audio coming over the speakers?
Let's try.
Okay, let's try. I'll give you the background. Okay, what he ended up doing was focusing on one couple who are handicapped. They have intellectually, they've got problems that they don't learn well. They had problems in school. They're really nice people. And they met up and got married, and they have, because they're not educated, well educated, they have jobs that don't pay very well. And the money that they make from their jobs, which are only part-time, is not nearly enough to pay rent or buy food. Not even close. I think what's considered the poverty level in our part of the country for two people would be about $15,000, and they probably make about $5,000 a year. And so they're way below it, and they get money from different agencies, and they get some free food, and they get help with their apartment and their rent.
Crossing guard for the city of Ames. Susie already had the job. I think we found it in the newspaper, and she had already been working at it for a year, and I decided I would apply for it. It's a lot of responsibility, but I have a lot of fun doing the job, knowing that I am keeping my students safe as they cross the street every day when they go to and from school. It makes me feel more responsible.
I'm crossing guard only in the afternoons because that's where the spot I'm at, they think is the best spot for me. I have two of my favorite girls there every day, and so that just brings a good highlight when they come.
Our income basically came from our Social Security, our SSI and SSDI. I would earn roughly anywhere from, I'd say, 130 to 150 a week. Since our income is pretty tight and we can't always afford to get groceries to cook, I find that Food at First is very beneficial for those of us who have limited incomes and can't always eat at home. To me, it means opportunities for socialization, an opportunity to get a good meal. Jobs are just very hard to come by, and not to mention that I feel that I like the job I'm in right now, and I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else right now. I'm not aware of anything to making money in the current situation we have. And if we make too much money, we could lose our Social Security, and I don't like the thought of that.
Tune in next time for even more amazing encounters with
After high school, he's worked track meets, and then after high school, I ran up the scores to the press box for a year, maybe 2 years. And then after that, we just started hanging out together a lot, and went over to each other's apartments and stuff like that, and spending most of the time together, and this is what happens. We've been married for 13 years. We have a good eyesight because we both have disabilities, but they're different. And so we have a tendency to balance out each other, because he's got some of the math and reading skills that I don't quite have efficient, but I have the social skills that he doesn't have, which we keep working on his social skills. Hey, we just have a tendency to help each other when it's needed, and we love our 4 kids.
Again, a Chinese student. Because my Chinese students aren't afraid. It's funny, my American students, they'll see this couple on the streets, but they're afraid to talk to them. And the Chinese students, I say, you want to know their story? Go talk to them. If you see somebody on a regular basis, strike up a conversation. You'd be surprised. People will talk to you if you show an interest in it. But of course, the issue of food insecurity is only a small part of this. That was the text part that accompanied the story. That was where he could explain the statistics and how many people in our community need to take advantage of these food kitchens. How many people are served every week, 3 meals? What is the limit, poverty level, and what can be done, and is there a structure in our community to help people like this? And of course, it created a bit of controversy too, because then some people say, oh, well, lazy people shouldn't get free food because they should have to work for it. So it started a conversation among audiences that saw it, which tends to happen an awful lot these days. Okay, this is a longer piece. This one is about 10 minutes, and this actually was the same student, and he was looking for something to spend a little more time on. He was really getting interested in shooting video. He had a Fuji, he had a point and shoot camera. That last story was done with a point and shoot. I've watched him work, and I look at him and I say, Shenru, what are you doing? And then the next day he'd show me on the computer, and I was like, I'm gonna shut up from now on, because given whatever tool, so he was playing around and he wanted to use his camera more. He bought a better camera, but it was still not like a super expensive professional camera by any means. But this time, the story was about our state, like a lot of states in the country, when they have budget problems, they want to stop giving money to education and stop giving money to social services. For instance, people who, like this last couple, who have mental disabilities, they are not capable of earning enough money to support themselves without help. And those are the first things that take a cut. Our state had a school for people who were blind, and we had another school for people who were deaf. And the state government decided that those schools cost too much money, and so we were going to close them. And those students can just figure out, their parents can figure out what to do. Well, in the end, neither school was closed. They lost a lot of money. They had to cut back because there was a big uproar. So this student decided he wanted to find out about one of these schools. And he knew somebody at our university that was working with a school from the deaf. So that was his in. He was able to through her, go to the school, meet people. He went with her the first time. And then he built a story around students from that school and our university and how they were working together. And he decided that it looked more interesting to show how the two schools have a lot in common. They're not people just because they can't hear and they use sign language doesn't mean that they should be completely separate from the rest of the society. So he put together a story that talked about a project of these two groups of students from different schools coming together.
My name is Mary Squander, and I'm the Poet Laureate of the state of Iowa.
This is the professor that
And
helped
I
him get to know the deaf students.
basically thought up this project with the School of the Deaf. I met some faculty from the School of the Deaf at the Poetry Out Loud conference in Des Moines, and the students were interpreting the poems. The deaf students got up and did interpretation that just blew me away, and with signing and movement, and I thought I'd love to do a project with them.
Like what I would do is I would take what it is you're describing, and I would literally just describe it, just only description, because you're really onto something really lovely in this last stanza, which I think is the central question of the poem, or the central issue of the speaker, that I'm only 1/6 Pennington, an Island carrier of a German name.
And I thought this poem was lovely. I thought all of the flood imagery was really strong. I could see a lot of really lovely movement associated with it for this collaboration.
From golden husk, the mother feeds to child. Meanwhile, legends crisscross the impassable marsh, warning us a plant that looks like snake stung, the ground lightning flower.
They really worked hard on their poems to make them a cohesive collection of nature poems that could be easily interpreted. That's not that easy to do in poetry. So they revised and reworked those poems, and then we went over to the School for the Deaf, and some of my students made a direct connection with some of those students that they really wanted, a specific person to interpret their poem.
Daughters before you and I, only one mother, and cottonwood feeds my horses full like summer sky. Rasichu, I am in you, dry powder and gum where bison run through.
White man, if I remember that correctly. So there's some context with that. So this is sort of this kind of ecstatic experience, and ecstatic prayer is supposed to draw both.
Okay, now, some of the stuff isn't that important for us to look at, but this is the students at our university, and then
either through their own pronunciation of the words or through their ability or inability to hear words, often the general public feels that they need to dummy down their thoughts, or they need to dummy down their sentences, or they need, so you have fully developed students, or fully developed human beings that can understand anything, and then they find themselves with a general public that's talking to them like they can't understand what they're saying. Because of that, I think the deaf students in general have developed incredibly positions of patience that most people wouldn't.
Under Judith Hemschemeyer, who...
We're going to move on to the next one there. But he wanted to take this issue about funding and possible closing schools. But people, they think, okay, well, it costs $2 million a year to have this school. Oh, we don't have $2 million, let's close it. But his idea was, if we show the people who are students there, the people who are affected by the closure, maybe people will change their attitudes. And I think that's, especially with images and video, that's how it's most effective, is like pulling at people's heartstrings. I mean, how can you listen to people, hear their stories, and feel the same way? It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet anymore. And this is what I think, when you're doing multimedia, it's a good thing to try. This is translating poems into sign language. Another project made by a student. This was about an environmental issue. You know, we all hear that we have problems with pollution and mining and terrible things happening to our climate, but the best way to communicate that is to show how it's affecting people. And so this student, if I can get this to play, went to a town.
一个村庄，这1000多口人，现在他也现在家里头不到20个人。
他们都在说这是亚洲第一大矿嘛，感觉都想着可能会对这边发展什么，但是一开始也会想到这个矿一建好以后，我们的地肯定就没了。
This coal mine is supposed to save the community, but instead the land shifted and everything flooded. And thousands of people lost their homes.
从03年开始建的矿，慢慢往这里塌，把地都塌完了，房子也塌下了，我们就没办法了，你知道。晚上睡觉的时候，你像往它有声音，就像猫走动一样，你知道，啪啦一声叫呢，但是你看也看不到哎。那后来这发现这个屋子开热了，那你看，那你心里都很难受啊，哎，那你眼看家没有家了，你知道吗？好好的一个家庭，你看看，白白的就没有了。我们一开始都没想到会有这一天，搬过来的时候都是高楼大厦，都是有楼房子啊、路呀、什么都好好的，好好的村庄呀、土地呀，一下子都变成水了、河了嘛，就心里都怕。我们农民肯定都指望土地，要没土地了，我们指望什么啊？
你看完这路况都好好的，都还漂亮，开矿了，塌了，没法做了，流水了，
现在地还有种地了，没塌了，塌了以后再走。
It's about the people and how they're affected. It's not about just the fact that there's a mine and it's changed the environment there and the community. It's how the community was affected. I need to take a break. So what I'm going to do is go back to and give you your assignments. Your job, after your, I don't know if you have a coffee break or a tea break now, is to go over to Shoe Bar across the street, which is not the easiest place to shoot, but nobody said life was easy. And you need to make a portrait of somebody. You need to, and I would advise you to actually talk to that person first. It's easier for you than it is for me. Well, maybe not, because my really bad Ukrainian with a few Polish words thrown in here and there, sometimes people take pity on me and they let me shoot photos. You may have to talk to somebody though. You don't want to just come in like a bandit, steal their image and then run off. It's hard to do good work that way. You need to have 3 photos that we're going to look at tomorrow of one person. There could be other people in the scene, but you need to find somebody who, I would look for somebody who's doing something. It could be everything from a grandmother who's out shopping for her family, or it could be somebody who works there, or it could be somebody who is taking a coffee break. It's up to you to find somebody that you think will be a good subject. This might sound difficult, and it probably will be. I once had to do this a long time ago, but we had to do 36 people. And we had to do 36 people in 3 hours. And the first 2 people I asked said no. And I was depressed. And I sat on a wall and I didn't know what to do. I was frozen because I asked 2 people and they both said no. And then I finally got up enough nerve to find somebody else and they said yes. And then another person, and then somebody who had said no, the first guy who I'd asked, was walking back along the street going the other direction a half hour later, and he came up to me and apologized for saying no, and said, sure, if you want to make a photograph. And so everything turned out okay, but I had 30 minutes of I was frozen. Sometimes people say no. You don't know why. Maybe they had a bad day, maybe they just don't like to be photographed. Don't let it stop you. Then find somebody else. Yesterday, I was walking back from the post office. Okay, 3 photos. I need somebody who will be responsible. Will they have access to the multimedia or to the newsroom? Or for computers later? I need somebody who will be responsible to be the person who gathers all 3 photos from everybody and then puts them on, or creates a folder on Google Docs, and everybody can submit to that folder on Google Docs, and then I'm invited to it. So maybe we can figure out somebody who would be responsible for creating the folder, and then everybody else knows which folder to add it to. We have volunteer. What's your name? Everybody hear that? Okay. She'll explain where it is on Google, and we'll find it. Okay, yesterday I was coming back from the post office, and I was looking through the fence of the park, and I said, oh, there's a guy up there with an easel. He's painting. So, this, you can see the first photo, kind of far away, huh? Yeah. From the first photo up to here, 22 minutes elapsed. Around, right, that fourth photo there, actually I threw out a lot of photos. I shot like 100. All of my photos. Around photo 4 or 5, it was getting closer to him. At that point, it's time to go say Dobry dien and start whatever Ukrainian I have, throw in a few Polish words, a Russian word here and there, and try to start a conversation. And I asked if it would be okay if I watched him and made photographs, and he said sure. He said, well, so then same thing with this guy. I also asked him, because I didn't want to just come and walk by and take a photo and then run off. I wanted to spend time. I wanted to look from the front. I looked from the front, and then I didn't really like the view from there. I preferred it from behind. I was looking for gestures. You know, I'm standing there like this waiting for like 1.5 minutes before I hit the button because his hand wasn't in the right place. But if I hadn't talked to them, it would have been weird. It would have felt uncomfortable. If they would have felt uncomfortable, I would have felt like I was doing something not right. So it's a matter, that's why I think in cases like this, yes, that first shot, those first few, I'm so far away, it doesn't really make sense to go talk yet. I'm just kind of working my way there. But once you realize you want to photograph somebody and you want to try to make a better image, you stop. Another young woman came by and did a drive-by. A drive-by is when you go by somewhere, you pick up your camera or your phone and you shoot, and then you keep going. Because then I went on Instagram to see what all pictures that were made in Yvonne Frankel Park yesterday. That's like 9 of like 30 that were made in the park yesterday that people put on Instagram. But if you want to get something a little deeper, you need to talk to people. You need to spend time. You need to make it so that they trust you. You know, you're not going to become best friends in 5 minutes. But if they can trust you, if they realize that you have good intent, that's what it comes down to. Because you were taking something from them. And if, for some reason, it seems like they're interested, you can easily send them a photo. If they have an email address, you can easily send something to them. And when you promise to do that, always do it. Because all it takes, I have students who go out and shoot assignments, they'll promise somebody photos afterwards, and then you never send the photos, and then since I live in a small town, 2 years later, somebody photographs that same person again, they promise them photos, and the person says, well, the last student told me they were that photographed me making cupcakes and baking cakes, promised me photos, and they never sent me photos. And I've even gotten emails from people in our town who said, your students come and they're always asking to make photos, and they always promise to send them, and they never do. Can you please send me some of those photos? So if you promise something to somebody, follow through. You know, not everybody you meet is going to be interested in seeing a copy. But sometimes people say, oh, can you send me one of those? And so do it. It's one of the things that at least you can do, because you're taking from people. When we show up in their life with our cameras, our audio recorders, our video cameras, we're taking from them. And sometimes you can easily pay back just by giving them a small image or just listening to them. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes just having a sympathetic ear is enough to get back. Okay, I think we need to take a break.
Дякую.